This brings us finally to the last point of meditation 6, which is about the knowledge of the relation between mind and body, including their very important distinction or separation. So Descartes thinks our minds, that is, are attached to bodies, and that they're very closely interwoven with one another, involved with one another, our minds and our bodies, so that our minds can direct our bodies, our minds get information from our bodies and about the external world from our bodies. So there's a lot of interaction between minds and bodies, according to Descartes. But they are distinct things, according to Descartes. Okay, and in this famous paragraph from Meditation 6, he basically describes the distinction and his reasons for being confident in the distinction. The paragraph reads as follows. First, I know that all the things that I clearly and distinctly understand can be made by God such as I understand them. For this reason, my ability clearly and distinctly to understand one thing without another suffices to make me certain that the one thing is different from the other, since they can be separated from each other, at least by God. The question as to the sort of power that might affect such a separation is not relevant to their being thought to be different. For this reason, from the fact that I know that I exist, and that at the same time I judge that obviously nothing else belongs to my nature or essence except that I am a thinking thing, I rightly conclude that my essence consists entirely in my being a thinking thing. So earlier, remember, he said he clearly and distinctly perceived that he existed as a thinking thing. And at that time, he was able to perceive that existence or think of that existence completely separately from the existence of bodies or anything else. And this, he's now saying, is sufficient to convince him that his essence consists entirely in being a thinking thing. So I would just flag that you might wonder whether or not you're convinced, ask whether or not you're convinced by this. I could see there are some famous reasons to be doubtful about whether or not this argument works. He goes on to say, and although perhaps, or rather, as I shall soon say, assuredly, I have a body that is very closely joined to me, nevertheless, because on the one hand I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, insofar as I am merely a thinking thing and not an extended thing, that is a thing that takes up space, but just a mind. And because on the other hand I have a distinct idea of a body, insofar as it is merely an extended thing and not a thinking thing. So here he's saying bodies, we're supposed to imagine that bodies, by their definition or in their nature, are extended things, things that take up space, and non-thinking things. It's certain that I am really distinct from my body and can exist without it. And you may remember that one of the things Descartes wanted to argue for in the Meditations, as advertised even in the title, is the distinction between the mind and the body and the possibility of the mind existing without the body, because that, again, is an argument for the possibility of life after death. So it's a way of saying how even the scientific revolution with Galileo and so on can go on, and people can study bodies, material things, in great detail. And this doesn't lead necessarily to a kind of materialism where we believe that the only thing exists is bodies and physical stuff, because the mind is something different from the body, and the mind is known to be this different thing, or different kind of thing, I should say, and therefore the mind can exist without the body, so the possibility of life after death is not challenged by the scientific revolution. This is part of the implication of what Descartes is saying. This position is a very famous one. It's called substance dualism or mind-body dualism, and basically Descartes invented it, this particular position about how reality is structured. He holds that there are two kinds of things. There are minds and there are bodies. There's mental stuff and there's physical stuff. And each of these kinds of things have a defining characteristic, that is a defining attribute, a feature that is true only of things of this kind. And it's what defines a thing of this kind, or what sets it apart from all other basic kinds of things. mental things have the attribute of thinking, which has to be understood in the broad sense of sensing, willing, and so on that he describes earlier in Meditation 2. Bodies, physical things, have the attribute of extension. They take up space. That means they have size. They have other physical properties that can be measured, like weight and so on. But they don't have any thinking in them. Okay, so thinking is something that is only characteristic of mental substances, and mental substances don't have any extension. They don't take up any space. Minds are spaceless. Okay, minds have other attributes, like they're being indivisible, they're unified, not divided or can't be divided, and they're known immediately by the people whose minds they are. And bodies have other features, like they are divisible, they can be broken up into pieces, and they're known only immediately by minds. So minds have to know them like through some process of judgment, through some process of experience, whereas minds can know themselves directly. So there's a difference there between minds and bodies too. This is a position within the philosophical field or discipline of metaphysics, and it's a controversial position. There are two bigger questions here that Descartes' mind-body dualism or substance dualism can be understood as an answer to. The bigger questions are, what kinds of substance are there? Or even more basically, what is reality like, most fundamentally? What is it composed of? What kind of stuff is there in the world? And Descartes' giving an answer. There is mental stuff and there's physical stuff. That's what the world is like. And, human beings are like composites of minds and bodies, but their minds can go on to exist after their bodies die. And inanimate objects, tables, chairs, and so on, and rocks and so on, are just physical substances. Animals are an interesting case, incidentally. Don't want to talk about that in great detail, but Descartes was suspicious. He thought that animals didn't have minds, so he basically thought animals were like machines. They were just, entirely physical things without minds like people have. So then that's a famously controversial position that he held about animals. So there are two big issues here, though, that Descartes is providing an answer to. One is, what kinds of substance are there? The other is, what kind of reality do mental and physical entities have, and how are they related? So, almost everybody recognizes that there are thoughts and emotions, or there seem to be. People have experiences of thoughts and emotions. So there's a question about what kind of reality do thoughts and entities have, and how are they related to physical reality? Okay, so mind-body dualism, or substance dualism, or Cartesian dualism, as it's sometimes called, named after Descartes, is intended as an answer to those questions. But it's not the only available answer to those questions. It's one position that is competing with a number of other positions, a number of other answers that have been given and can be given. Okay, and a lot of the debate in modern philosophy after Descartes is a debate about what variations or modifications or alternative to substance dualism ought we to adopt. So Descartes, this is part of why Descartes is the father of modern philosophy, because he sets up a problem. One problem that he sets up, or one of the major problems that he sets up, is this problem of, how do we understand the relation between the mind and the body, or minds and bodies? How do we understand the relationship between mental stuff and physical stuff? And again, there are a number of different answers that are given that are different from Descartes, and almost everybody that comes after Descartes is arguing with Descartes in some regard about this question. So one option is materialism. That's to say that there really aren't such things as thoughts and emotions, or if there are such things as thoughts and emotions, they basically are physical things. They just are physical things. Okay, so the position that holds that there aren't really thoughts and emotions is known as eliminativism, after like the idea of eliminating talk of thoughts and emotions because they don't really exist. So that it's a kind of illusion. It seems to us like we have thoughts and emotions, mental stuff, but it doesn't really exist. So that's one possible position. Another possible position is reductive materialism, which holds that yes, there are thoughts and experiences, but they can be reduced. They can theoretically be reduced to physical things. That is, that ultimately what they boil down to, what they are in reality, is physical things. Then there's a position called idealism, which holds that there aren't really physical things, or anything that's physical is ultimately itself also mental. So that everything that we experience as or we can know about a physical world and external world, maybe it exists, but it exists as a mode of thought or a mode of mind. One of the people who defended this position, Berkeley, in the 18th century, shortly after Descartes, argued that all things that exist are ideas in the mind of God. So everything that exists is an idea. It's not. There's no such thing really as physical things that aren't mental. And then there are a number of other positions which I won't mention on this slide, but I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of what some of the available options are to encourage a little bit of critical thinking about Descartes' position here. We sort of had two things to wrestle with. One is Descartes' position on this question, and I'm pointing out there are a number of alternatives. So you might think about which of these, what way of thinking about these questions is most attractive to you and why. But then also we have Descartes' arguments about the issue, and we need to take those seriously too, because whatever we want to believe about this, if Descartes' arguments are convincing, well, we might have to just change our mind and agree with him. So anyway, I wanted to share that stuff with you, and I think this brings us to the end of our discussion of Descartes.